If you are or aspire to be a real estate investor, please pay very close attention. Two very powerful industry groups have succeeded in proposing and advancing legislation that can cause you to be guilty of a felony simply by performing a Subject to transaction. We may truly be witnessing the death of Subject to investing unless we act now. For years, the gold standard of creative real estate buying strategies has been Subject to. With the Subject to strategy, you can buy property without using your own credit just by taking over existing payments on properties. There was no limit to the amount of property you could own. You could buy one property or you could buy 1,000. It just didn't matter. It was limited only by your hard work. Now, in today's market environment where there's so many foreclosures and there are so many motivated sellers, Subject to is the perfect strategy for our time. So what's the problem? Well, two separate but related industry groups are using their significant political leverage to completely cut independent investors out of the Subject to investing business. This is not a potential threat, it's a clear and present danger. Legislation has already been drafted and already been approved. This legislation has already passed in the House of Representatives and has been presented to the Senate in one state where Subject to is used heavily. This legislation appears to have been directly written by the two industry groups who are plotting against real estate investors like you. If you think I'm sounding like an off-the-wall conspiracy theorist, consider this. This legislation effectively slams the door on the use of Subject to transactions by real estate investors for two separate reasons. First, homeowners will be required to acquire written consent from lenders prior to the execution of Subject to transactions. My friend, if you've ever done a Subject to transaction before, you know that lenders will never offer written consent. Despite the fact that it's the dirty little secret in the industry that lenders don't mind Subject to transactions happening, they can't go on record as accepting them. So this alone will slam the door on the ability for real estate investors to do Subject to transactions. The second reason is that there are only two groups of people who are exempted from this requirement. And those two groups of people are the two industry groups who were behind the drafting of this legislation. So it sounds kind of conspiratorial, and my friend, you don't even have to trust me on this. I'm going to provide to you the legislation and the link to it so that you can actually read it for yourself. This leads to three critical questions about the groups conspiring against investors like you. Who are these people? Why do they so desperately want to prevent you from performing Subject to transactions? And what do they stand to gain by limiting your ability to invest in real estate? In just a moment, I'll give you the answers to those questions, but there are actually three more important issues for you to consider right now. First, does this legislation apply to you right now? If it does, you might have to change the way that you do business right away. Next, is similar legislation being proposed or drafted in your area? Next, how should concerned investors like you and like me respond when targeted with this type of rogue legislation? My friend, the time to act is now. Real estate investors must be organized and prepared to respond as a group, not individually, but as a group, when threatening legislation arises. It is possible that real estate investors who violate this type of law, even if they do so unknowingly, could be classified as having perpetrated mortgage fraud. Mortgage fraud is a felony in many states, and being convicted of a felony changes everything for you for the worse. It is a big deal, and it is very, very bad. And that could happen just by doing Subject to transactions in places where this type of legislation has passed. This is why we must be organized now. It's in our best interest to stay in contact with each other and to make sure that we're using the best practices to ensure we don't attract the attention of overzealous regulators. So please enter your name, email, and state of residence at brianellis.com/subject2 so that we can stay in touch with you as more legal challenges mount to the strategies we use every day as investors. We have to be able to stay in touch with each other and respond quickly whenever threats arise. As soon as you enter your information, I'll tell you the state where this legislation was proposed, its current status, and the identity of the two industry groups who are behind it and who stand to benefit at your expense. Remember, with this legislation, nobody can do subject to transactions under the old way that we can do it right now, which is freely, except for these two groups. They stand to benefit, you stand to lose. I'll also show you the exact legislation that has been proposed. Then you can read it for yourself and confirm that this is a clear and present danger for real estate investors like you. Please don't leave this page without joining the campaign to keep Subject to legal. If Subject to becomes illegal, everybody loses, except for the two groups behind this legislation. Please enter your name, email address, and state of residence in the space provided. This is truly a matter of grave importance. Please act now, and thank you for your time.